All right, so once you've upgraded your account to an advanced subscription or above, you can then begin the process of working with multi-currency with all of your sales and your purchase orders. A couple of things that we need to talk about first before we start getting into the details of multi-currency is from the settings screen, we should do a quick recap on the base currency, which is the actual currency that you're using for all of your costing. It's how you manage your accounting. All of the basis for your costing of products and materials will be in this particular currency here. Now, when multi-currency is activated, it gives you the option for any sales order or purchase order that's created to put that sales order or purchase order into a different type of currency. Now, if you start creating and start using the multi-currency feature, you'll notice that this actual drop down here, which is designed to change the base currency on your account, will become locked. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So let's say, for example, I make a sales order, and I'll put this in some customer's name. And let's say that the customer is going to buy an item like so. Then you'll see the order currency here. So this is the base currency for the order. I can change that to USD, for example, and it will automatically do the conversion for me. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about this first. So it converts it automatically from my base currency of euros to US dollars. I can change that to whatever it is that I need. Let's say I want to do $600 and just keep it nice and round. And you'll see the converted total over here to what I'm selling it for. But anyhow, once you have made your first purchase order or first sales order in a foreign currency after you've activated multi-currency, then you'll find in your settings screen that the general base currency here has been activated as not being able to change. So your base currency will become locked once you start creating any type of order in a foreign currency. So this is something that's super important to pay attention to when you're working with these, because if you need to change your base currency for whatever reason, which would be usually really rare, then you need to be aware that it does get locked when you use multi-currency. Now, a couple of other areas or reasons why the currency would be locked would not just be because of the reason I showed you, but if you connect to an accounting solution, or you connect to an e-commerce store, those types of actions will also lock your currency. In addition to that, with respect to purchase orders, those can also be made in a foreign currency as well. And if you make one in a foreign currency from your base currency, then that will also lock this specific base currency on your account. So something to be very mindful of. In order to unlock it, you'll have to basically reverse a lot of the things that you already did to make it possible again. So for example, in my sales order, which is the one I just made here, I would therefore need to basically delete that along with any other action that would lock my base currency in order to make my base currency able to be unlocked again. So that just kind of gives you an idea of something that you need to pay attention to. Now, in case you're in a situation where you don't need to show the currency field for your all of your documents, you can lock that field as well. So that way the actual currency field is not visible. There are certain cases where that would be applied, but it's a little additional feature for certain customers that might not require the actual currency field to be visible for their operations. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about how does currency conversion work. So I want to show you a website that we use on Katana's account, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how everything kind of ties together. There's a website called openexchangerates.com. I'll take a quick look. Open Exchange Rates. And this website is what Katana uses to update the currency conversions on a 24-hour basis. So that means that, for example, if you're generating, let's say, a sales order on your Katana account, and that sales order will be in a foreign currency that's different from your base currency, We'll make another one just like we had before. And you see that if I change this to US dollars, it's going to have a currency exchange rate of 0.94 from the dollar to the euro. And so this will be the actual cost in euros, since my base currency is in euros. Now, when it comes to the sales orders as well as purchase orders, there are certain events where there's the exchange rate as it is now, and then there's the other event where the exchange rate has to become locked when the transaction takes place. And there's a couple of events where that transaction will lock the actual exchange rate. So in this case, this actual sales order is presently open, so it hasn't been shipped off yet. It hasn't actually generated any invoice against it, but there are certain events that will lock the exchange rate. But before an exchange rate gets locked on a sales order, for example, it's going to have this floating conversion rate, and that conversion rate is updated once every 24 hours. So at the time that a specific event where the order is either invoice generated, packed, or imported in from an online e-commerce integration, only at those moments in time does an exchange rate gets locked on that specific transaction. Now, why it's like that is, for example, if you have an e-commerce website connected, your customer is going to pay in a foreign currency on your website at that moment in time with a credit card. That's usually how it works. The sales order comes in, it's a receipt purchase, it's already been paid for, so that means that at the moment that that transaction took place, then the exchange rate that took place at that transaction should be what counts. If you manually add a sales order here in the Katana account, then another way to lock the exchange rate would be to generate an invoice with your accounting integration. So if you generate an invoice with your accounting integration, this would be the next prioritization on when that exchange rate would actually get locked. If you do neither of those, either import through e-commerce or make an invoice, but you ship it, the first moment that it's marked as packed is when the exchange rate gets fixed. So these are some things to be taking a note of. Katana doesn't have a system in place where you automatically set the exchange rates for any purchases or sales order currencies, but instead we use real-time exchange rates all the time on your open orders, and then they lock at specific moments. So that's the order of prioritization. E-commerce locks first, invoice generated locks second, and then packed locks as last. And so in case you ever wonder how that works, that's how that works. Now, it is possible to go back and make adjustments when needed, but as a general rule, that's how currency conversion is working within the locked basis on your Katana account with this feature. To give you a small demonstration of how it's going to lock on this particular order is if I choose to pack all of the items in the sales order, that's when the rate becomes fixed and it locks at this particular moment. Now, if you need to adjust it, you can choose Edit and do whatever edits that are necessary here. This is a manual process, but it's also possible. So just so you know, those types of adjustments can be made in order for you to have the maximum amount of flexibility with respect to multi-currency. Now, to show you a couple other small nuances with respect to how multi-currency works is that every single item that you have on your Katana account is kept in its base currency, right? So for example, if you set a default sales price on an item, I'll go ahead and reverse this order real quick. What I want to show you here is we have this coffee table, this cognac colored coffee table. I'll put this back into euros. And if we look at the product item card, we will see that there is a default sales price of 540 euros for all of these different models. Now, when we're using the Katana system, we're always referencing that as your default sales price. So for example, when I make a sales order, like I did for this customer, and it will show up as the euro base price, it'll be 540 euros all the time. And that's how it always works when we're making a manual sales order. Now, I'm specifically saying manual sales order because if you're doing your e-commerce integration, it brings in whatever price is listed on your website. So if you have a foreign currency on your website, it converts that into it brings it in as it is, but its cost will be fixed at a specific exchange rate at that time whenever it is processed. But when you're manually making your sales orders or you're manually making your purchase orders, it will use your default sales price or default purchase price for products and materials, depending on the type of document you're making. And then if you change the currency of the order, then it will actually convert it to that from the default sales price. So unless you manually change something, then that's how it will look. So let's say traditionally the euro is higher in value than the dollar. So in this case, this should be a slightly higher number compared to the euro. So if I adjust that to USD, it'll go up to $574 because that is in fact the sales price at the current exchange rate if we're adjusting the sales order. So one of the big advantages here is that if you're selling something, let's say you have your base sales price and you are going to list a sales order in a different currency that might be prone to fluctuation with a specific exchange rate, then the advantage of this is you'll be able to get the most recent exchange rate to properly sell that item for your necessary margin. So always updating for that scenario. You might want to round that up or round that down, whatever works for your product pricing within that region or within that currency. So next up, we'll cover a little bit more details about how you can set default currencies for suppliers as well as customers.